Hi guys, it's Lindsay. Welcome back to The Wandering Reader. Today I'm going to be doing my June book wish list video. I put quite a few books on my wish list in June, so I've got 30 books to talk to you about today. I don't know, I just maybe watched a lot of videos and had a lot of good recommendations, so I did put more on my list, but I got to 30 and I was like, can't talk about more than that because it'll be like a 40-minute video, it'd be ridiculous. So I'm not going to be spending too long talking about each one. I'm just going to give you a basic kind of summary and then move on from there. So hopefully you get some good recommendations from this video. The first bit that I want to talk about is called I Am Sasha, and this is by Anita Selzer, and Kirsty from Melbourne on My Mind does a Twitter wrap up, I think every week or every couple of weeks, and she mentioned this on her Twitter wrap up. And this is a historical fiction novel that's set in German occupied Poland in 1942, and it's basically about a mother who trains her son to be a girl because the Nazis have been making boys pull down their trousers to see whether they're circumcised. So she trains her son to be a girl. So basically he isn't shot or sent to a death camp. So that sounds like a really interesting premise and something that I would like reading. The next one on my list is I Was Anastasia, and this is by Ariel Lehorn. Lehorn, I think that's how you pronounce that. And I got this recommendation from Lindsay's Little Library. She talked about this in her May book haul. And this is about the Russian Grand Duchess Anastasia Romanov. And it's obviously a historical fiction novel that's set in 1918 and 1920 Russia, and it's about this Grand Duchess, and I think it centres around the idea of her popping back up again after something happened with her family, and then trying to get people to believe who she is, basically. I don't know an awful lot about Russian history, and I really would like to get to know it a little bit better, so I think one of the best ways of kind of opening your eyes to that a bit more is through fiction, so this sounded like a good one. The next one I have, again from Lindsay's book haul, was The Coincidence of Coconut Cake, and this is by Amy E. Reichardt, and this is about a talented chef and the food critic who brings down her restaurant, and then there's a romance when they sort of don't realise who each other is. So it's a book that centres around food, but also it's contemporary, it's got some romance in it. Love the cover, and I just thought it sounded like something I'd be really interested in reading. The next one I have is The Substitute, and this is by Denise Grover Swank, and I heard about this from Jen Talks Audiobooks. She talked about this in one of her Friday Reads videos, and this is the first in a romance series, and there's been something about romance this month where I've just kind of been really craving romance recommendations. I haven't read a romance novel yet. No, I haven't. But I just, yeah, I used to really read a lot in the genre, and then I stopped, and yeah, I just kind of feel like I could get back into it again. So this is the first in a romance series, and it focuses around a character called Megan who has broken off her engagement, and she's flying home. And there's a guy called Josh, he's sitting in the seat next to her, and I believe they form some sort of a relationship. So, sounds good. Another one that she talked about in that Friday Reads video was The Consequences of Rejection by Rachel Van Dicken, and this is a standalone romance, and it's been described as laugh out loud funny, so the combination of romance and hilarity really drew me into this one, and Jen had good things to say about it. A non-fiction book that I added to my wish list this month was Butterfly, and this is by Yusra Mardini, and I heard about this one from Kath Elizabeth Reed's May book haul, and I believe she was sent a copy of this by the publisher. This is basically a non-fiction memoir focusing around Yusra's life, and it's about when she fled Syria in 2015, and she had to get on a boat to go to Turkey, I believe, or Greece, one of the two. Something happened to the boat, and her sister had to help to they basically swam, and they took the boat with them in order to survive, basically. And then it was about her journey when she got to the UK. I'm not overly sure about this, and she became an Olympic athlete, and I just think that the story sounds absolutely fascinating and really, really relevant to a lot of the stuff that's going on with the refugee crisis at the moment. Next up is The Siren by Kira Cass, and I put this on my wish list because I finished the Selection series, and this is the only other book that she has written. This is a standalone fantasy romance that I believe is, I think, sort of like a Little Mermaid retelling. So it's about a siren who falls in love with a man and that sort of thing, and she's not supposed to. So I think it's kind of along those lines. I did really quite enjoy the Section series, so I thought I'd check out the other book that she's written. Next I have another non-fiction book, and it's called Too Fat, Too Slutty and Too Loud, and this is by Anne Helen Peterson. I heard about this one from Heidi over at My Reading Life. She did a video where she updated you on her 2018 Read Harder challenge about what books that she'd read from that particular list, and I can't remember which challenge it focused on, but these are basically essays that are about unruly women. So they feature people like Marilyn Monroe, Hillary Clinton, Serena Williams, I think Nicki Minaj was in there, and it's just kind of about that kind of whole stereotype and about sort of how women are portrayed in the media and that sort of thing, and it just sounded fascinating. Next is a contemporary recommendation, and it's Where the Heart Is, and this is by Billy Letts, and I heard about this one from, again, Lindsay's Little Library. She did a adult contemporary recommendations video, and this was an Oprah book club book, which I was kind of intrigued by anyway. I sort of want to do a little bit more research into that particular list, because it seems to be that they read some really good books that people rave about. So anyway, it's an Oprah book club book, and it's about a woman called Nova Lee, and her boyfriend leaves her in Walmart and just drives off, and she's pregnant and penniless, and it's about the people that she meets in this particular town that help her out, and it sounded like a really interesting one. Another one that I have on the list is The Life We Bury, and this is by Alan Eskins, and this is another one that Lindsay recommended on that list, and this is about a college student called Joe Talbot, and he has this English assignment, so he decides to go to the local nursing home, and there he meets somebody called Carl Iverson, and he is a Vietnam veteran, and he's also a convicted murderer, and he's dying in this nursing home, and Joe basically interviews him for this English assignment that he's got, and I think we learn about Iverson's life across the book, and there's something about the idea of him being a convicted murderer and also a Vietnam veteran that kind of really drew me in and made me put it on my list. Next up is Every Breath, and this is by Ellie Marnie, and a novelty corner from her channel. She did a recommendation on Aussie authors, and she described this book, and I think it's the first book in the series, as Sherlock Holmes as being like the boy next door sort of thing. So I think it's like a YA Sherlock Holmes kind of retelling, or inspired by Sherlock Holmes. So it's a thriller, and she had good things to say about this writer. Next up is a book that I love the title of. It's called Soya Sauce for Beginners, and this is by Kirsten Shen, and Kendra Wilkinson talked about this in her June book haul part 2, and I just thought it sounded fascinating, and I really love the cover as well. This is about a female character called Gretchen, and she moves from San Francisco back to her childhood home in Singapore. And she's having to deal with her mother's drinking problem, and also her dad's got this sort of artisan soya sauce business, and it's been described as a foodie love story, and that just checks so many boxes for me, so I had to put it on the list. I also have here My So-Called Bollywood Life, and this is by Nisha Sharma. I heard about this from Alexis over at The Sloth Reader. She talked about this in her May wrap-up, and this is basically a YA contemporary book that is inspired by Bollywood, and I didn't really need to know much more than that, really. I just thought it sounded like a really good time. I haven't watched any Bollywood movies, but I've watched the movies that are kind of inspired by Bollywood, and I'm just really interested in that whole kind of industry, and it sounded like a good time. I also have So Lucky, and this is by Nicola Griffith, and I heard about this one from Russell at Ink and Paper blog. He talked about this one in his May wrap-up, and this is an autobiographical novel. This basically follows, what's her name, Nicola's life, and within a week her wife leaves her and she's diagnosed with multiple sclerosis, and it's about that kind of point in her life, and it's been described as America's treatment of the disabled and the chronically ill. So I thought that sounded like something that would be a really interesting topic, and Russell had good things to say about it. He also recommended a short story collection called Foreign Soil, and this is by Maxine Beniba Clark. and these are short stories that cross the world in terms of where they're set, and they're described as giving voice to the lost, the disenfranchised and the mistreated. And I believe he read this for his around the world book club that he does. I'll leave a link to that down below. But yeah, he just had really good things to say about this collection, and I don't read an awful lot of short story collections, so I thought that'd be a good one to pick up. And lastly, in that wrap-up of Russell's, he talked about Stray City, and this is by Chelsea Johnson, and this is her debut novel, and it's about a main character called Andrea, I say Andrea, and she breaks free of a Catholic family and starts a lesbian relationship, but then one day she goes out and sleeps with a man and gets pregnant, and I think it's about kind of like the fallout of that, and then like the kind of idea of, you know, blurring of boundaries when it comes to sexual identity, like that kind of thing. So again, sounded really interesting. I don't get many recommendations from Twitter, but this next one was a recommendation from there, and it's called Eve the Awakening, and it's by Jenna Moresi, and there's a woman on Twitter, and her Twitter handle is Art From A Friend, and she did a post about books you read that made you want to bump ratings down on everything else, so kind of nothing touches these particular books. And this was the one that she talked about as being, as like sort of starting that post off. And all I know about this is that it's a sci-fi, and that it follows people at university, but she, you know, that kind of whole category thing really piqued my interest, so I had to add it. Next up is Peter Pan by J.M. Barrie, and this is a bit of a weird one because obviously I knew about this before, but I went to see a performance of Peter Pan at Regent's Park Open Air Theatre, and I have been to that open air theatre before and seen a couple of other productions, and they've been absolutely fantastic. And the same for Peter Pan, it was so wonderful. We took, I think, 100 or so Year 7 and 8 students on a Friday evening, and it was just wonderful, and it made me think about the fact that I've never actually read the story before. I loved the Disney movie as a child, and I really like the movie Hook as well. It's got Robin Williams in it, and yeah, love the story, but I've never actually read the tale before. So there's this particular edition that I've got a photo of on the screen. I can't remember who the publisher is, but this edition is coming out in July, so I thought I'd put it on my list and then order it once it is published. Next up is Anger Is a Gift, and this is by Mark Oshiro, and Natasha at My Reading Is Odd really raved about this book in her May wrap-up. And she sort of said it was in the vein of The Hate You Give. It kind of follows a main character who is at school, so it focuses around life at school, and it's about kind of channeling your anger, I think, and the kind of discrimination that goes on in American high schools. So sounded really, really good, and she had nothing but good things to say about it. Then I have some more romance recommendations. The first is The Bachelor Auction, and this is by Rachel Van Dicken, so I've mentioned her before. And Lisa from Books and Smiles hauled this one in her May book haul, and it's the first book in a romance trilogy that focuses around billionaires, and I don't know, yeah, I was just in a big romance mood and thought that sounded like a good time. Also from Lisa at Books and Smiles, she did the quintessentially summer tag, and she talked about The Memory Watcher by Minka Kent. And I believe this is sort of like a psychological thriller, and it's about a mum who gives up her baby, and then she moves to a particular part of this town where she can basically watch the family who adopt her, watch her bring them up basically, and then she kind of gets in with the family in some sort of way. They don't really know who she is, and the family turn out to be not all they seem. So Lisa always recommends really good psychological thrillers, so I thought this would be a good one to add. She also, in the same video, recommended Brother by Anya Alborn, and she has recommended this on her channel before, I've just not added it. This is a horror book, and I think this is the reason I haven't added it before. I don't read a lot of horror, if any. Off the top of my head, I can't think of any horror books that I've read. Yeah, but she said that this was kind of in the vein of the Saw movies. Again, I've not watched any of those, but she said it was really, really good, and she doesn't read a lot of horror either. So I don't know, I just thought it might be something for me to try out. And again, in that same video, she talked about Our Kind of Cruelty, and this is by Araminta Hall. This is another thriller, and this is about a couple who play a game called The Crave. And that's all I really know about it. Sounds kind of creepy. Again, a good time. Then Bree Hill did a romance recommendations video on her channel, and she recommended The Wedding Date by Jasmine Guillory. I've heard about this on a few other people's channels as well, but she said that it was a really good romance book to pick up. This is about two people who meet in a lift, and the guy asks her to be his date to his ex's wedding, so they go to this wedding and then a relationship sort of springs out of that. And a lot of people have been saying good things about it as well, because it has the woman is a person of colour, so you kind of got that representation as well in it, so yeah, good one. She also recommended Hate to Want You by Alicia Raj, and this is about a couple who come together for one night every year, and then one night she doesn't show up, and it's about the fallout of that. So I think he kind of thinks it's just a, you know, I don't know, like just a sex thing, I suppose, and then she doesn't show up one night, and I think he kind of starts to realise that maybe this isn't just a sex thing. So yeah, sounds interesting. And then the last one in that recommendations video that she did was An Extraordinary Union, and this is by Alyssa Cole, and this is a historical romance, and this is about a woman called Elle, and she's a former slave turned Union Army spy, and she joins forces with Malcolm, and they're trying to kind of infiltrate this particular group. I think it's set during the American Civil War, I think. And it's about the relationship that they form, and Bree talked about the fact that it doesn't shy away from the problems that come with the fact that she's black and he's white at that particular time, which I thought was really interesting, so I thought I'd give that one a go. Next up is Lights in the Distance, and this is by Daniel Trilling, and this was another Twitter recommendation, but I can't remember off the top of my head what it was on Twitter. But anyway, this is a book of sort of reportage, and it's about the refugee crisis. So I think Daniel did a lot of travelling around over Europe over the last few years, and it's about different stories of people that he met. Sounds fascinating. I've also got here On the Island, and this is by Tracy Garvis Graves, and this was another one that Kath from Elizabeth Reads talked about in a current library loans video that she did a couple of weeks ago. I've also heard Lisa talk about this from Books and Smiles. I'm not overly sure about it, but I thought I might give it a go. So this is another romance book, and this is why I'm not sure about it. It's about a teenage boy and a woman who's tutoring him, and his family decide that it's the summer and he needs a break, and you know, so they fly him and his tutor out on holiday somewhere, but the plane goes down and crashes. They both survive on this particular island, and then it's kind of skips forward into years later when they start forming a relationship. And yeah, the fact that she's his teacher beforehand is what's sort of holding me back slightly, because I don't like that particular trope. He is a lot older apparently. I don't know, I thought I would add it and then see what I think. And then the last one I have on the list is a book called Lucky Boy, and this is by Shanti Sekaran, and Heidi at My Reading Life did a video where she talked about the Reading Women Challenge, which is a challenge that's going on in June, that's based on the Reading Women podcast that Kendra Wilkinson partly hosts. And there are a number of prompts to read throughout June, and prompt number 8 is I think about a book that's about refugees or asylum or that sort of thing. So she recommended this one, and this is about a woman who crosses the US-Mexico border. She's pregnant, and after she's had her son, she's detained, and she has to give him up to an American couple. And I think it's about kind of his upbringing and what happens to her and things like that. So Heidi had good things to say about it. And that wasn't the last one. This is the last one. She also recommended in that video In the Country We Love, and this is by Diane Guerrero. And I believe Diane Guerrero is an actress over in the States. I think she was on Orange is the New Black, but I'm not too au fait with that. I haven't watched it or anything. But this is her non-fiction memoir where she talks about the immigrant experience, and basically her and her parents came over to the US, and then when she was a teenager, I think, or sort of like partway through high school, her parents were deported and she stayed in America and had to stay with friends and things like that. And it's about how she fought for her education and things like that, and it just sounded really good, and Heidi had good things to say about it. and said that she'd listened to the audiobook, and the audiobook was really good because it was told from Diane's point of view. So yeah, another good one to think about. So there you go guys, they were all of the books that I added to my wish list in June. Like I said at the beginning, there were a few others. I went on this huge kind of like historical fiction obsessed video watching sort of episode, and I added a load of historical fiction as well, but if I talked about those as well, this video would be like a million minutes long, so I'm not going to. I might do a separate video of that, but then again I might not, we'll see. So I'd love to have a chat with you in the comments below. Have you read any of these books and what did you think of them, and have you got any other recommendations for me based on anything that I talked about today? Thanks very much for watching, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye.